Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Lady in the Smoke, a Victorian Mystery by Karen Odden. Narrated by Mary Sarah. Chapter 1. Liverpool Street Station, London, May, 1874. My mother's nerves were brittle as a porcelain teacup worn thin around the edge, which is why she took an extra dose of laudanum before we boarded the train home that day. I doubt anyone around us on the crowded platform could have guessed that she had a tincture of alcohol and opium running through her veins at 11:30 in the morning. Looking at her, they'd see only a well-dressed gentlewoman, her face tranquil, and her fair hair beautifully arranged under an expensive hat. But I knew. In the 10 years since my father had died, I'd learned how to recognize when she'd taken an extra sip from the brown bottle she kept in her reticule, by her dreamy silence, by the faint smile that came and went without cause, and a certain softness to her chin, like a blur in an unfinished portrait. I glanced sideways. Yes, she was very different now from what she'd been a mere 10 hours ago, when we were alone in our rooms. Her voice hard, her face contorted with fury. A shriek cut through the dull roar inside the station, and our train rounded the corner, the racket of the wheels driving the pigeons off the rafters and into a whirl of feathers. The engine came to a halt, belching steam and filling the air with the smells of coal dust and burnt oil.
"Up to train to York!"
bellowed the station master.
"Running express to Hertford and stopping at all points north."
Railway servants in red uniforms rushed to the first-class carriages with sets of wooden steps, and passengers started to disembark. In a few minutes, we'd be on our way out of this God-forsaken city. "Lady Fraser! Lady Elizabeth! Oh, my dears!" shrilled a woman's voice. I kept my face averted. I didn't want to see anyone I knew. Please, just let us get on this train and be gone. "Lady Elizabeth! I say, Lady Elizabeth!" I sighed and turned to see a plump woman trying to shift her way through the crowd. What was her name? Miss Rush. She was one of my distant relations who had been at Lady Laurie's ball last night. Her round face was splotched pink with the effort she was making to reach us, and I felt a pang of pity. She must exist on the farthest fringe of society, for apparently no one at the ball had felt there was any social currency to be gained by telling her the rumours about us. Otherwise, Miss Rush would have been watching us slyly and leaving us quite alone. "Are you taking this train home, then?" she asked breathlessly as she drew near. I forced a smile. "Yes, we are. And you?"
"Oh, yes."
Miss Rush gave a quick, curious glance at my mother, who was staring into mid-air. Then she gazed wistfully at the train. "But of course you are riding in a first-class carriage." "Alas, when one is retrenching, every farthing matters, as you know. But then—" a little tentative laugh and a wave toward the second-class carriages, close behind the smoking engines. "You wouldn't know, my dear. But no matter. I'd have endured any sort of travel for such a ball. I didn't see you dancing very often, but when you're married, I'm sure you'll have a ball just as beautiful." I winced and looked away. The first passengers were being helped aboard, and people around us were beginning to push forward. I took my mother's arm and said apologetically, "I'm afraid my mother is very fatigued. We should go to "And your cousin looked just as a bride should with her new husband." She leaned forward as if she were about to confide a secret. "I've heard that Americans are brash and uncouth, but he wasn't dreadful at all. In fact, he was—" I let the crowd draw us apart, raised my hands helplessly, and called over my shoulder, "I'm sorry, we must go. I wish you a pleasant trip home." "Oh, of course. Goodbye, dear." She smiled brightly, like a child pretending not to be hurt. and gave a little wave as we turned away. Something inside me shriveled at my selfishness for not taking her hint and inviting her to share our compartment. But if I had to listen to her prattle on about that wretched ball for hours, I'd throw myself off the train, like one of those mad people I'd read about in the papers. "Miss?" One of the railway servants for the first-class carriages had his gloved hand out, waiting to help me aboard. Mamma was already inside, and as I stepped up, I could feel the vibration of the train under my feet. I followed Mamma down a corridor so narrow that it was a good thing birdcage crinoline skirts were no longer in fashion. Our compartment was the middle one of 3, and quite spacious, but the windows were small, and the green velvet cushions lumpy and frayed. On the backward-facing wall was a painted advertisement for Hudson's dry soap that featured a busy harbour at sunset. Mamma took the forward-facing seat near the door. I sat down between her and the window and closed my eyes. Even at rest the train trembled with a fierce energy. Something near my ear rattled, and I opened my eyes to see one of the window panes jiggling against the frame. I put up my gloved hand to still it. Through the dirt on the glass, I saw a figure on the platform that looked familiar, and my heart jumped. Could that be Anne? But my friend was supposed to be with her brother Francis at Venwell, their family estate in Scotland, for another fortnight. I found the least grimy part of the window and peered out. The woman had Anne's dark hair, coiled in the same style Anne always wore, and the same slim shoulders wrapped in a blue coat. As she turned her head to look at the train, my hand was already up to wave. But it wasn't Anne, of course not. The disappointment pushed like a weight at my chest. I leaned back against the velvet, watching the young woman disappear into the crowd of people, all shoving and bumping against one another, like sheep in a shearing corral. If I'd had Anne with me last night, I could have borne it. When that first pair of ladies darted looks at me and raised their fans to hide their mouths, Anne would have raised her own fan and whispered things that would have helped me swallow down my growing discomfort. But the entire Reynolds family was avoiding the season because of an awful article about Anne's brother that had appeared in the Courier a few months ago. So I'd stood alone, half hidden by a marble pillar, and tried to keep the colour from mounting to my cheeks, while I wondered what on earth people could be saying. I was an heiress, with a respectable dowry of £10,000 per annum. I was 20 years old, not unattractive, though I lacked the fair beauty of my mother, with a name and title that stood well up on the list of landed gentry, and no scandal attached to me. As such, I was considered a fine catch in the marriage market, as Anne and I joked dryly, much like tenderloin at the butcher. And it was only my 3rd season, so it's not as though my goods were rotting. I had opened my dance card and noticed that it was oddly empty. And then, as I stood, with my gloved hand pressed against the pillar, I heard Lady Nestor say that she had it on good authority that my family's fortunes were slipping, and my £10,000 per annum was soon to be a thing of the past. I felt a sick churning in my stomach, and the ballroom suddenly seemed unbearably hot. I slid farther behind the pillar, resisting the urge to find my mother then and there, to ask whether what Lady Nestor said was true. I forced myself to compose my face, to remain where I was, and wait the 2 agonizing hours until we were finally back in our rooms. And then there were 2 more agonizing hours, listening to her rage at me that yes, it was true, and wasn't I sorry, because now I would pay for my stupidity. I, who was selfish always. Our carriage rattled as heavy cargo doors slammed closed. The station master blew his whistle again and made the last call for people to board. I turned to look at my mother. She gazed vaguely at the soap advertisement, her gloved hands resting on her reticule, the laudanum smile hovering around her lips. I didn't know if I preferred her screaming at me or completely absent, like this. Over the years I'd learned that when there was a raw edge to her rage, it was often because she had missed her laudanum, or because she'd drunk more than a glass or two of champagne. But her accusations from last night still hurt me, and frightened me too. I wasn't such a fool as to believe that my personal charms were enough to preserve my place in the marriage market. Without a dowry, I would no longer be one of the choicer cuts of beef. I wondered bitterly what I'd be now. The skirt steak, perhaps, in need of a hearty sauce to conceal its indifferent quality. I swallowed the lump in my throat and looked back out the window, wishing desperately that the train would pull out of the station. What on earth was taking so long? The handle to our compartment turned with a sharp click, and the door swung in. A heavy-set, well-dressed gentleman entered our carriage and stowed his briefcase on the rack overhead. How strange! We'd reserved a private compartment. At least, I thought we had. But perhaps this was part of our change of fortune, a small way that my mother chose to retrench, as Miss Rush put it. My mother merely smiled distractedly at him, and I didn't want the fuss of calling a porter, or whomever one called in such cases. Without taking a bit of notice of us, he sat down opposite, facing the rear of the train, placed his hat on the seat beside him, folded his hands across his chest, and closed his eyes. He would have caught Anne's painterly eye. His bald head was egg-shaped, narrow at the top, and fuller at the bottom. He had eyebrows as bristly as Mr. Jagger's in Great Expectations, and his thin lips turned down sourly. He remained utterly still, except for his jowls, which shuddered as the train began to move. Rain knifed against the windows as we pulled out of the station. Finally, after several weeks away, we were going home. I'd never liked London, with its rotten yellow air, its hordes of people in cabs and carriages that fought for space on the streets, the working men who walked with their shoulders hunched, as if merely getting through the day was a burden on their backs, and the gossip that filled the air like mosquitoes over a swampland. I'd never come here again if I could help it. As the train sped up, the silver telegraph lines above dipped and curved faster than my eyes could follow, and the wooden poles blurred together. The rhythm of the wheels lulled me into a sort of stupor, and eventually I slept. Then came a high-pitched screech of metal wheels on the iron track, and I was flung across the compartment before I could put up my hands. Chapter 2. My forehead smacked against the opposite wall, and I fell backward, my hands clawing for purchase on something, anything, as my eyes flew open. The carriage behind smashed into ours, and I pitched forward again, a scream searing in my throat. Our carriage groaned and creaked, and to my horror I began to tip sideways. I clutched at the armrest on the seat, but something heavy hit me from behind, and everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I woke, the carriage was still. I was in a heap on the tilted floor. My forehead was throbbing, and everything, even my hand on the wooden board, was a blur. I blinked hard, and the walls came into focus. The panelling was splintered, and the side window was blown to bits, with only a jagged edge of glass remaining. The air outside was dark, with roiling grey smoke. Groggily, I pushed myself to sitting, and instantly felt like I was going to be sick. I took a few deep breaths and swallowed hard. Then I turned to find Mama. She was slumped beside me. The bald man and his briefcase were gone, and we were alone. Then, above incoherent screams and the sounds of doors slamming open, came audible shouts of "Fire!" and smoke was burning the back of my throat and stinging my eyes. How close was it? I half slid, half scrambled to the window and looked out. A gust cleared the air for a moment, long enough for me to see the curve ahead. The two black engines and a tender had run wholly off the rails and up against an embankment. The half-dozen carriages behind were accordioned haphazardly across the tracks. Brilliant fire leaped from the second engine, the long orange fingers having already caught the first few carriages and reaching for the next. Black smoke billowed into the air, and as I watched, sparks flew onto the rooftop of the carriage in front of us, landed and began to burn. I tore my eyes away, my heart thudding in my chest. Mamma lay limply on the floor between the seats, her skirts awry, her leg twisted under her, her open eyes, 2 black holes in her face. "Mamma! Mamma!" I shook her, hard, too frightened to be gentle. She blinked. She was alive. I sobbed in relief. "Mamma! The train is on fire! We have to get out!" A splotch of red appeared on her cheek, as if it had welled up from inside her. I had a second of panic, and then I tasted the metallic tang of blood at the corner of my mouth and put a hand to my face. It came away smeared with red, and I felt a rush of relief as I realized the blood was mine, not hers. I put my hands on Mamma's shoulders and pulled her to sitting. "Mamma, please!" Her expression was dazed, but I wrenched myself to my feet and attempted to lift her. She made it only as far as her knees before she reached over and groped for her reticule, the useless little jewelled bag. Its handle was stuck around a spring that had torn through the velvet of the seat, and she tugged at it feebly. "Never mind it, Mamma! Never mind it!" I threw my arm around her waist and dragged her toward the corridor. This side of the carriage was broken as well, and dark smoke and bits of ash were filling the air, so I could barely see. I cried out, expecting to find people from the other compartments, but there was no one, and no human voices near us, just the roar and snap of the fire. Everyone else had already fled. As I stepped into the corridor, my foot landed on nothing, and I tumbled backward, my palms scraping against jagged wood. Panic rose in me as I realized that parts of the carriage floor were gone, and Mamma was like a dead weight on my arm.
"Mad! Give her to me!"
came a heavily accented voice. From behind me, out of the smoke, emerged a man who reached over and seized my mother by the waist. He was tall and broad, with a face as heavily bearded as a gypsy's, and black eyes that glittered dangerously. God knows where he came from, or how he knew we were in there, but he wrapped one big arm around my mother to lift her over his shoulder, threw his other arm around me, and got us all the way to the steps at the end of the carriage. Before I could touch the railing, the man slapped my hand away from it.
"No! Metal's hot!"
With nothing to balance me, I stumbled down the stairs. He shoved Mamma into my arms.
"Wait! Wait! Get away from the train! Go!"
He sprang off the steps and ran toward the next carriage. Pieces of hot orange ash quivered in the smoke. I gasped, but there was nothing to breathe except the scorching air. I half carried, half dragged Mamma along, the lick of the heat chasing us into a grassy field. Mamma limped badly, but I didn't slow until we'd reached a place where the air was almost clear and dozens of people crouched on the ground. Thank God we still had our travel cloaks on. The wind was chilling. There was no shelter nearby. The nearest trees were too far to reach on foot. Exhausted and shaking, I found a rock for us to sit against and wrapped my mother in half my cloak and all of her own. She shivered against me and dropped her face into her hands. But I watched the horrible scene before me, unable to look away. A second fire had sprung from a carriage in the rear, and all up and down the train people still clambered and crawled out of doors and windows, the well-bodied helping the wounded, carrying them out on their backs and on makeshift stretchers. Near the front of the train, a woman jumped from a carriage, her dress in flames, and began to run. A man chased after her, but she raced on, her mouth open in a cry I couldn't hear. Suddenly I thought of Miss Rush, riding in one of the forward carriages because I'd kept her from joining us. Out of the wave of guilt and shame came a desperate prayer that she was all right. And then I heard the shrieks of terrified horses, shrill and piercing, sounding so much like my black mare Athena, that I had a panic second before I remembered she was safe at home. I strained my eyes to find the animals amidst the smoke, plunging and struggling against their handlers, but there were none. It took a moment for me to realize what was happening. The horses were burning alive in the stock cars. The thought of them tortured by the sparks on their skin, pounding the doors with their hooves and screaming in terror, brought hot tears to my eyes. I put my fists in my mouth to keep from screaming myself. Finally the water trucks arrived, the workhorses balking in the traces, until the drivers used their whips to drive them toward the burning wreck. Men in shirt-sleeves pumped furiously, while others directed hoses toward the worst of the blaze, until at last the flames began to subside. All around us people crowded, sitting in the dirt, or on a few scattered rocks, old men and young. The landed gentry side by side with peasants, foreigners beside English folk, well-dressed ladies next to women in ragged shawls. The disaster made no distinctions. A low, savage cry made me look up. A man limped by, passing close enough for me to touch, holding a child to his chest, as tenderly as if she were asleep, and he were carrying her to bed. But her brown hair was singed short. Her light blue dress was blackened and in shreds around her thin legs and her arm. I could no longer look or listen. With a sob, I put my head down, clasped my hands over my ears, and shut my eyes tight. How long had it been? 2 hours, maybe 3. It was growing dark. A light rain had fallen briefly, and we were drenched. The burning carriages had become black, smouldering ruins against the grey sky, with stubborn bits of fire showing like darts amidst the wreckage. A chilling breeze still gusted across the field. Wagons and carriages had begun to appear, rolling amongst the crowd, making their own paths to retrieve friends and relations. Wheels creaked and scraped over the uneven ground. Lanterns swung in yellow arcs, and voices cried out names. But thus far, no one had called out for us. Our backs to the stone, Mamma and I remained seated in the dirt. My head throbbed if I moved it, so I wrapped my arms around my knees and rested my right temple on my forearm. The cut on my head had stopped bleeding, but the left side of my face and neck was sticky with blood. Mamma was unconscious, slumped against my shoulder, but she was breathing normally, so I let her be. For once I was glad for laudanum's soporific effect. It was better that she wasn't awake for this. I wished I didn't have to be, and I had never been so cold. Then I heard a man's voice, close to my ear, and felt a warm hand on my shoulder. "Are you all right?" A pause. "Miss, I'm a surgeon. I'd like to help you, if I may." I needed to respond, to move, to say something, but my whole body was achingly stiff. "Miss, can you hear me?" I lifted my head to see a man kneeling at my side. He looked to be only a few years older than myself. His dark hair was wet from the rain, and there were flecks of mud on his face. His eyes darted to my forehead. He bent toward me. "You have a nasty cut on your head. May I help you? And is this your mother?" His voice, kind and steady, had a trace of an accent that I couldn't place. Welsh, maybe, or Scottish. "Miss, can you speak?" He asked it insistently. "Yes." It came out like a croak. He looked relieved. "Good. Are you hurt anywhere else, beside your head?" "No, but I'm not sure about my mother." My throat felt raw, but I forced the words out. "She fainted." He reached inside his coat and drew out a stethoscope. "Don't worry. It's quite usual in railway accidents. She probably just needs to get warm and take some stimulant. There's a wagon nearby. Come to remove people to a hotel at Travers. I'd like to get you both on it." "Travers?" I repeated. "But that's not on the railway line." "No, you're just a few miles north of Homestead. But Travers is the closest town, with Odden." His stethoscope was different than the one our old family doctor used. His had only one earpiece, whereas this man's had 2. Quickly he placed one in each ear. With his right hand he supported Mamma's shoulders, and with the other he applied the round end of the stethoscope to her chest. Deftly his fingers felt for her wrist. his lips moving faintly. His expression revealed neither relief nor anxiety, though I had the impression that he was practised at keeping his face calm. It was a handsome face, with high cheekbones, dark eyebrows, and a full mouth, though his dark hair was too long to be fashionable, and it was clear he had once broken his nose. The shoulders of his coat were stained dark from the rain, and his trousers were smeared with mud. I wondered how long he'd been out here. He tucked the stethoscope back inside his coat.
Have you tried to rouse her?
I shook my head. I think she hurts her leg. I had to drag her most of the way here.
You did a good thing, getting her away from the fire. The smoke can be poisonous.
He moved his hands to her ankles, felt them gently. Is she all right?
She had a bad sprain on her left ankle, but nothing's broken, so far as I can tell.
He looked again at my forehead.
I'd like to take care of that cut for you, so no infection sets in.
I reached up for my forehead, but he caught my hand at the wrist.
Don't touch it.
I stared, alarmed. Is it bad?
Not at all, he said. A few stitches worth.
Now?
Yes, it won't take long. Can you lie back?
He took a towel from his bag and folded it into a rough square.
Put your head here.
Watching him uncertainly, I rolled slowly to the ground, resting my head on the towel. But lying flat made me sick again, worse than before, and I turned away from him, retching into the grass. Mortified, I stayed turned away, even when I'd finished.
Take this.
Around my shoulder came his hand, proffering a damp handkerchief.
It's all right. We'll get you to Travers, and you'll be fine.
I wiped my mouth and lay back, sweating and trembling.
I'm going to give you something that will make this easier.
He placed some cotton in a little paper cone and dribbled some clear liquid out of a green bottle. It smelled sweet and dangerous, like Mama's laudanum. What is it? Panicking, I tried to sit up again. What are you doing?
It's a spirit called chloroform, he said patiently. You breathe it in, and it will make you fall into a light sleep. As soon as I'm finished stitching, it should only take a minute or two. I'll take it away, and you wake up. I've poured only the smallest dose.
He held the cone, waiting, but made no move to force it upon me. The idea of letting a stranger put me to sleep should have terrified me, but I looked into his face and saw both compassion and intelligence. And then he gave a smile, brief but reassuring.
Truly, I am a surgeon, not some bad man. If you prefer, we can wait till you arrive at the hotel, but I'm afraid there won't be a doctor to help you.
He glanced over the field, taking a measure of the suffering around him.
I expect to be here for a while.
I nodded and lay back. He placed the cone gently over my nose.
Now, breathe in and count backward from 10 for me,
he said, taking my hand at the wrist. The first breath was bitter and sweet at once, and then the smell faded. I closed my eyes obediently. 10, 9, 8. And when I woke, his hand was on my wrist, his face close but blurred.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I whispered and tried to sit up, but my limbs wouldn't move.
Lie still. Your head will clear in a few minutes. Take some deep breaths.
The air was cold and stank of oily smoke, but I could also smell the wet earth underneath me, loamy and rich. He was right. With each breath the fog in my head lifted. My limbs regained feeling, and the world came back into focus. I watched him pack up his bag, stowing his needle in a little case, and winding the unused suturing material into a tidy loop. When he finished, he turned back to me and smiled.
How are you feeling now?
I pushed myself to sitting. All right, I think. Gingerly, I reached up and felt a strip of bandage and some plaster. He jerked his head over his shoulder.
The wagon's right there. I don't want you to miss it. There may not be another for a while.
The wagon and the horse were indeed only a few...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?